Amongst the bountiful farmlands of western Geatland, the chanting of monks can be heard. Quietly, the men tend to their daily chores in prayer. The soughing of the wind in the birch trees, the twittering of birds, the church bells ringing. While all around them, a burning civil war is fought between the house of Erik and the house of Sverker for the crown of Sweden. This is Varnhem Abbey. The story of Varnhem has its beginnings earlier, however, before the clash of Erik and Sverker, even before the historical line of kings, in the legendary days of Björn Ironside. The popular image of the Viking Age Scandinavians have slowly changed over the years, and lately more and more people know that they weren't all about the pillage and plunder, but also into the trade and exploration business. But one thing remains relatively unchanged: the Vikings were pagans. For a long time it was believed that the Swedes converted to Christianity in the Middle Ages. In other words, the Viking Age ends, everybody's now Christian, and the medieval period is here. That would be around the year 1000. But if we have a look at the graves of Varnhem, we can see that Christians were buried in a Christian fashion there in the 800s. The early Swedish monarchs weren't explicitly anti-Christianity, and they would have let missionaries into their land, famously including Ansgar, known as the Apostle of the North. These Christians of course needed a church, and as Christians are wont to do, they built one, a wooden stave church. The church was built on a rich estate, now known as Katta Farm. Katta's farm was no hut in the woods, no. This was a wealthy and connected place, filled with coins from as far away as Rome. The landlord on Katta's farm was a trendsetter. A new church was built in collaboration with Danes, Germans, and Englishmen, bringing with them the technology to build large stone structures. This is thought to be the origin point of the stone church building trend that spread throughout western Geatland and beyond during the upcoming centuries. This was the year 1040, the closing days of the Munsö dynasty, the reign of Anon James, the second Christian king of Sweden. Let's fast forward to the reign of Sverker the Elder, founder of the House of Sverker. He's relevant to us now because his wife was a big fan of the Cistercians, a Benedictine monastic order. These guys were allowed over from France to Sweden to live there, but to do that, they needed a place to live. Many rich people made donations to the monks, and one in particular, a knight's wife, Lady Sigrid, donated a place called Varnhem to the order, where they promptly started the construction of an abbey. The construction of the abbey was sponsored by the House of Erik, which by this point, after the assassination of Sverker the Elder, was embroiled in a war for the throne. So the abbey was inhabited by the Cistercians. Who were they? What did they do? Simply put, ora et labora, which means prayer and labor. The Cistercians were big believers in physical work, mainly agriculture. These were no lazy fat monks. They even did away with a lot of the superfluous ceremony and rituals to make more time for their true passion, silent farming. One of the goals for these humble brothers in Christ was to not rely on gifts and tithe to uphold their lifestyle. They wanted to become self-sufficient, but a monk's life is a busy one. With all the prayer and reading, a Cistercian's life was basically divided into 4 parts: reading theology, partaking in worship, sleep, and labor. The 2 first of these, the Opus Dei and the Lectio Divina, took up a lot of the monks' time, and so they had to delegate. Lay brothers were recruited from among Swedish farmers. These fellows weren't full-on monks, but they lived in the abbey. They also partook in the Cistercian lifestyle, but they had less strict rules on the Opus Dei and Lectio Divina, leaving more time for labor. The lay brothers would help the monks to buy and sell produce and cattle. Disaster struck in 1234 when a fire raged throughout the abbey, destroying it. The monks, now suddenly homeless, weren't left without sympathy. The abbey had, as previously mentioned, been in league with the House of Erik. Sitting on the throne in 1234, after years of bloody strife, was Erik the 11th Eriksson, the lisp and lame of House Erik, the victor after the Erik-Sverker civil war that had been going on since the 1100s. The last of the House Sverker, a woman, married Erik, so the houses were joined. But just as the conflict came to an end, the House of Erik, too, would fall. At the same time as the dynastic struggles by the 2 houses tore the land apart, strongmen were needed to keep order, and chaos was an opportunity. The title of Jarl of Sweden was the second most powerful in the realm. One man in particular had his eyes on the title. His name was Birger Magnusson of the noble house of Bjelbo. Being rich and all, he took the opportunity to finance the repairs of Varnhem after the fire of 1234. The abbey was restored even past its former glory, and its church was now the largest in Sweden. Quite a brag for the house of Erik, and of course, the sponsor, House of Bjelbo, Birger in particular. Birger eventually became Jarl, and went down in history as Birger Jarl, an absolute legend. He was married to King Erik XI's sister, and when Erik conveniently died without an heir, power was transferred to Birger Jarl's son Valdemar through his wife. In the aftermath of the Eriksverker Wars, Valdemar Birgersson of House Bjelbo ascended the throne in 1250. This was of course followed by 100 years of strife and civil war, but this time with all new players. That, however, is beyond the scope of Varnhem. Both Erik, the last of House Erik, and Birger Jarl were buried in Varnhem. Our boys the Cistercians now lived in blessed peace and quiet for a long time. It wasn't until the 1500s they would be disturbed again. This would be a sad time for Varnhem. To understand the reason for this, let's have a look at that Swedish throne again. Currently reigning in the year 1527 is Gustav Vasa. When he came to power, he had exiled the previous Archbishop Trolle and sent a letter to the Pope in Rome, who insisted on reinstating Trolle. Gustav, who didn't want to do that, became Protestant. This is of course a simplification of events, and the real grunt work was done by two Lutheran scholar brothers called Olaus and Laurentius Petri. They evangelized and published a Swedish language Bible, known as the Gustav Vasa Bible. The king was a huge fan of this new way of faith, mainly because it gave him absolute power over the church in Sweden. Gustav had to grow royal power, and to do this he had an idea: reduction. In 1527, it was decided, amongst other things, that the crown had the right to confiscate any monastic land, and Gustav immediately used this right to confiscate land, including Varnhem. Thus, the time for our darling boys the Cistercians came to an end. The bad time kept rolling, however. Gustav Vasa had fought and led the Swedish War of Independence from the Kalmar Union, led by the Danish king, Christian III. Now, both the old kings were dead, and their sons, Erik XIV of Sweden and Frederick II of Denmark, were itching for a fight. The Danish king wanted Sweden back into the fold. The Swedes refused. War would come to Varnhem. Focusing on the events of Western Geatland, in 1563, the Danish forces struck out and launched an assault on Älvsborg, which they won. With Älvsborg in their clutches, Western Geatland laid open. The Danes, under command of Daniel Rantzau, first razed Lödöse and then moved further inland. In January 1566, Varnhem was razed and the abbey burned down. The Danes were finally expelled from Geatland by Charles de Mornay at the Battle of Brobacka. The abbey was destroyed, but hope remains as the church yet stood. And after the war, King John III gave it some minor renovation. It wasn't until it came into the hands of Count Magnus Gabriel de la Gardie, who received it as a gift from the royal house. He thoroughly renovated the church, but let the ruins of the monastery stay as ruins. Thus, the definite end of Varnhem Abbey. The church still stands today, almost 1,000 years old. I've personally been there several times, and it's absolutely beautiful. I highly recommend putting it on your bucket list for your next trip to Sweden. If you got an interest in the dynastic struggles, the Eriks and Sverkers, I can also recommend the movie Arn the Knight Templar, which is set during this time. That's it for now. Hope to see all you stunning listeners again in another video.